As part of our sermon series, Ethnic Blends, we've recorded some conversations with people in our church from diverse backgrounds and ages and cultures. We know that when you listen to someone's story and hear their lived experience, it's then when some of the hurt and the pain and the frustration from our past and our present is dealt with. We believe as a church that we are one culture, kingdom culture. There's one race, the human race, but we are a diverse blend of all ethnicities together. So, can I ask you, be gracious as you listen to these conversations, but also open up your heart to what God wants to do as you listen. Enjoy.
Sunelle, good morning. It is so good to have you with us as we speak as part of our Ethnic Blends series, just about some of your experiences of growing up in our beautiful country.
Good morning, Taiki. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you. Sunelle, I think a great place to start would probably be just to ask the question, what would you say it was like growing up in South Africa?
I turned 21 in 1995, so I grew up under apartheid. I grew up in Boksburg. I spent the first 16 years of my life there. And then when I was in Standard 8, grade 10, we moved to Pretoria. So I grew up in white neighborhoods. I went to white schools, a white church. Our family was slightly different from other white Afrikaans-speaking families because we belonged to the AFM church and not to one of the more traditional churches. But it was all white. And even when we came to Pretoria, it was the same. And I studied at a white university. I never had any black classmates in all the time, even at university. At some point, some Indian students were allowed, and I made an Indian friend. I can't remember, third or fourth year. We had very limited interaction with black people, really limited. I think we didn't even have a domestic worker most of the time. And I had some interaction with black people when I started working as a teenager. I worked at Checkers in Brooklyn when I was in matric. And suddenly I got into a tea room at tea time with black people, but older black people. And when I started waitering, then the waiters would typically be white for the evening shifts and management would be white, but we would have black kitchen staff. So that was about the most interaction I had with black people by the time I turned 21, which was very limited. And also in 1994, it's not only that we changed politically, there were also some changes in media. Remember, before then, there was no internet when I was growing up. We had very little television. Television was just starting. And you had like a dedicated SABC 1 for Afrikaans and English, where we watched certain programs. Yes, radio was a big thing. I grew up with a lot of radio, so the Afrikaans radio was always in the background. Esme Everard's program for the men on the border. So it was time of national service for all white young men, 2 years. So everybody knew somebody on the border, got letters, wrote letters. so that was the first 21 years. I think it was just very white, very Afrikaans as well. I think I started learning English in Standard 2 from scratch. We didn't even have English friends.
And what were some of the developments after 1994, 1995 that you experienced?
1994, there I was very lucky. I worked at a voting station in the first democratic elections. At that time, I didn't realize the significance of it, really. It was just a student job. And then a very profound moment for me was, it came in 1995. shortly after I turned 21. Some friends, I had a chance to go with them on a 4x4 tour to Botswana. It was the first time that I went to another country. I've been to Southwest Africa before that, Namibia today. So, we went over the border and we slept in the veld for 5 nights. It was really remote where we were going. And somewhere on that trip, I wanted to buy some wooden animals next to the road. And we knew that we would want to do that, and people advised us to take along some second-hand clothing so that we could pay for it with that. So I came prepared, and I saw this little elephant that I wanted. And I said, okay, I have these T-shirts. Would you like them? And then it was a guy of my age, a black guy, and he looked me straight in the eye and he said, I want cash, please. And it's so simple, but it was such a profound moment. It was the first time in my life that I actually had an eye-to-eye conversation with somebody of my own age. And this guy was confident. It was not like awkward or black-white, or we were talking as equals. And at that moment, I just realized a flag or a light or something went up. That was a 1995 experience. And then there was sort of a bland cross-cultural decade for me. I was studying full-time, part-time. I worked at white firms that had some or many black clients, but I didn't have any black colleagues.
Okay.
And the big change came in 2008 when I started working at UNISA, which is quite a transformed environment. And suddenly I had black colleagues.
Awesome.
I had black supervisors, black mentors. As I went on, I got black mentees. Obviously, I had black students. And that was only the start. It was more and more as transformation went on. More and more black people came to work there. And it was a time of fees must fall that then came. And decoloniality and constitutional transformation became something. I work in the law faculty. So we had to engage with that more and more. Okay. And that, I think, is the best thing that ever happened to me.
Okay.
I'm just so lucky that I got into that environment.
I think you've got such a rich history when I hear just about different experiences. And I'd love to know, what would you say are some of the highs and lows in terms of your experiences growing up in our racial climate?
I think the low is that we grew up so segregated that I know it's not the story of all Afrikaans white people, but my growing up was a whites only growing up. So there was I never got to know anything about black people, black culture, black politics. So it's the sadness of being so European after being in Africa for hundreds of years. It is, how on earth did we manage that? And why would you want to do that? So that is, I think, the way I grew up, that is a low in that sense.
Yeah.
Although obviously I had a very white privileged upbringing. The downside of that is that we were so deprived of this. And then I think the best thing, or the great highlight, was then the opportunity to work at UNISA in a transformed environment, and the journey that made possible for me.
What do you think for you, would you say, has been so much better about that experience? If you can compare it to your previous experience, very white experience, very segregated. Now working at UNISA with your colleagues, your mentors, your mentees, your students, you seem to be somebody that really enjoys being in a multi-ethnic environment. Why is that? What is it about it you enjoy?
It is just the richness of it, and being corrected all the time.
Okay.
Like, I thought I understood how the world worked, and I actually knew nothing.
Okay.
And having colleagues that are kind and are helpful, but that are just different voices and help you to see things differently. Like, for example, something that comes to mind is at the start of this journey, I put my hand up to talk at a conference that is traditionally a very black, a very political law conference. It's generally not attended by white people.
Okay.
And a young white colleague of mine, he saw my name on the program, and okay, that's interesting. So what are you going to talk about? And it was mainly that I went in with the best intentions. I just wanted to go and say, okay, this is now very black and very political. I just want to go and bring the white side of the story. Let's just bring the balance back to, to this conference, sort of the idea. And he said something along the lines, but I just hope you're not going to defend yourself and you're not going to say that you are not privileged. I'm not privileged. That is my reaction. We talked a little and he left me. And and that is when I started to say, okay, here's something. I must find out what white privilege means, because I don't get it. And that was the beginning of a journey on its own. And what is so amazing about this example, as you come to terms with white privilege, how things that you read before start falling in place. Like earlier, I read a novel by Etienne van Heerden. It's called, the Afrikaans title is In Steede van die Liefde. In Steede van die Liefde, I don't know what the English title is. And there was this young man, Christian, who grew up in Stellenbosch, went to Paul Roos, and he was the 400 meters champ. But it was in apartheid time, so he never competed against black or colored guys. And then on a Sunday afternoon, he met with he knew there was another athlete, a colored guy, and they met on this dusty track, and they raced, and the other guy won. And Christian went back home and he took all his trophies standing around and he put them away in a cupboard. And suddenly, I knew that story, I read that story, and then it just puts a whole new spin on it. If you look into white privilege and then you look at that story differently. So many things that I read and saw and did when I grew up just gets a totally new spin on it. So it is like living those first 30 years of your life over again in a different way, which makes it very rich. It's not only about now, it's also about how you see things from the past. Another example from literature, I like reading poetry, and there's Clinton du Plessis, is an Afrikaans poet, and he wrote a collection of poems called Rangeer. So like me, he also grew up as a spoorwegkind. My whole family worked for the railway. They were train drivers, and then they became white-collar workers in the transport services, and we were the first generation that went to study. So Clinton du Plessis also comes from that background, but he's colored. And always I would say, for example, I would dedicate my doctorate, for instance, to my grandfather, who was a train driver, and he always wanted us to study, and look where we are now. And then I read these poems from Clinton describing how they, when they were children, looked up to a train driver.
Wow.
Because his dad did not have access to a job like that. So when my story was, okay, we worked so hard, and my grandfather, he couldn't study, and all of that, although it is valid, you just hear somebody else's story, a different perspective on the same scenario, and what it was like traveling for them in the trains, or on the trains. It's
Wow, that's incredible. I love hearing just those stories, and I think it's important to educate ourselves and have conversations, which is really what this series is all about. So now I just want to take it to the gospel, and I want to ask, you are a woman of faith, and I just want to know, how has the gospel actually influenced the way you look at race and segregation and the racial climate in our country?
There is the saying that the road to hell is paved by good intentions, paved with good intentions. And I think we are quick to say you should love your neighbor as yourself, but just going in with good intentions or loving intentions or charitable intentions, you can go very wrong. So what I try to do is, although loving your neighbor as yourself, that is the key of everything that Jesus said of love God and love your neighbor as yourself. What does love really translate to? What does it mean to love somebody else? There was an example that a lecturer shared with us in psychology, in undergrad psychology, when we were doing community psychology. I don't know how true the story is, but apparently there was a group that went to a rural village, and they said, okay, but you walk so far to go and fetch water. We are going to provide a tap for you here next to your houses. And they did that, and later on they came back and they saw, but nobody's using the tap, or not as much. And what would the first reaction be? Like, these people, we did all of this, and now they're not using the tap. And then when they started asking questions, they found out that going to fetch water is a very important social activity in that community. I don't know if it's only the girls or the girls and the boys who go and fetch water, but it's a social thing. So that's a very simple example, but it explains something that you can try to do good, you can, but if you don't listen to the other person, it can be wrong or just miss the point entirely. And so much of this comes together for me in the book of James. And one of the main points that he's making is that you should be quick to listen and slow to speak. So for somebody that speaks as much as I do, I have to really do a lot of listening. But the power of just listening to the other side. In law, we have the basic rule, audi alteram partem. It's listen to the other side. A judge cannot arrive at a valid decision if he didn't listen to the other side of the story. And so we say love your neighbor as yourself, but what does that mean? And I think if we can say, it also means listening, really listening to somebody else, before or during whatever it is that you intend to do good, we can go very far. At what's very current at the point, for example, is Black Lives Matter. So now, if you are white, generally, and there's a movement that says Black Lives Matter, what is your first reaction? It's typically something like all lives matter, or what about the farm murders, which is a valid point, and it's an American problem. How is it valid to us? But the thing is, before you say that, have you really listened to what Black Lives Matter is about?
Yeah.
Have you listened to the other side of the story? And in prayer, ask God how you should be dealing with this. Let's just turn the positions around. If you were advocating for a white cause, a valid white cause, let's say farm murders, for example, that there should be more police reaction against that. And the police would tell you, okay, but we're not going to give attention to this because at the moment police brutality is a bigger issue. How would you feel about that? You would say, this guy is not listening to me. Why is he not listening to what I'm saying? I also have a valid point to make. It's not about whose point is the most important. So it's just the idea of, before you arrive at any conclusion about these things, just to listen to the other side, and to listen to different voices. Nothing wrong with Marula Media, but if you're only going to listen to Marula Media, you're not going to hear the other side of the story. You have to be in that space and in other spaces as well to get these different angles on things. And it is tremendously painful. At UNISA, when I started engaging with decoloniality, I remember going to a 2-week decoloniality summer school. It was at the beginning of the year. It was so hard. And by that time, I already knew a few things. It was full days for 2 weeks. And many days I didn't make it to lunch. I just couldn't. It is just all the things I never knew, I never heard, nobody ever told me. And it just comes down on you like a ton of bricks. And on the other hand, through all of these things, all of these conferences and talks and things that I attended, however hard the conversations were, the space was still very friendly. Like lunchtime, you would sit on a round table with just Black people, and just how kind they were to me, and how they said, we appreciate that you are here. Thanks for coming. Thanks for listening. And then after lunch again, it was hard again, but generally that, I think that is important. In my experience, one-on-one, Black colleagues have been really kind to me, although they didn't have to, or don't have to be. So although the conversations are hard, I think it is so welcomed. Who doesn't want to be listened to? That's the point. And if you want to do unto others as you want yourself to be done to, we all want to be listened to. I'm sitting here because I want you to hear me. Everybody wants to be heard.
Amen. Sunelle, I just love hearing your stories. I love hearing just how you have discovered and found different revelations on your journey in terms of just the racial climate and what we've experienced in this country. And I love what you're saying about just listening and truly hearing other people's experiences and learning from them. It's been so good to spend this time with you. I've really, as I say, enjoyed it. Enjoyed hearing from your life. And thank you for sharing that with us today.
Thanks, Taiki.